This is another edition of Sachem Conversations. I'm Chris Vaccaro, joined by the legendary Frank Schmidt. We're going to talk Sachem soccer. We're going to talk decades worth of history. We're going to talk about Coach's journey, the impact he had on Sachem, his perspective on Sachem. I love that you have a very specific mind related to history and the social and economic and the impact of people here from your social studies world and education. And so there's just so much to talk about. I've been excited about this conversation, and welcome and thanks for joining me.
Chris, thank you. Thank you for everything you've done so far for Sachem and continue to do.
My pleasure. My pleasure. These are the types of conversations that I love to have because it strings together who we were before we became a powerhouse, who we were during that marvelous stretch of almost 40 years, and who we are now, trying to figure out where we go from here and not forget the past, but use the past to help create a successful future, even if the goalposts are slightly different, even if there's society coming down in different ways that's way different than the late 1960s when you started coaching. But there's also a lot of things that we like to talk about that people don't know that happened 40, 50 years ago. And your career spanned, from the coaching perspective, parts of 4 decades. Not everybody can say that, because a lot of the people that started coaching that became legends in Sachem, early 70s to mid 70s, late 70s, you had the 60s. I mean, you had a whole different time period.
Had the last year of the 60s, yeah.
Yeah, well, still, you see
right.
9 and you're like, oh man. When I was looking back at some of the old yearbooks, I'm like, yeah, this really stretched back a little bit. So what was it like, those early parts, and how did society impact Sachem, and what was your journey to get there?
Wow, that's a heavy question there, Chris. Let's limit it to Sachem here. I got the job at Sachem. I was probably one of the last ones to be hired. I came in August of 1969, like a week, 10 days before schools to open. And it was a high school at that time, which is now Samoset, right? Because the new high school hadn't been built yet. And the district was beginning to expand, was beginning to grow. I think what's important, again, to really appreciate your community is to appreciate its history. When I arrived at Sachem 69, the graduating class was around 500, 550 kids. And by the late 80s, right, it was around 1,700. I mean, in that 25-year period, we tripled in size. And the community was just the growing pain of going through a triple increase in population made it a very interesting place to be at. When I first arrived, I had heard of Lake Ronkonkoma. I remember coming out to visit my cousin in Lake Ronkonkoma. Had the good fortune of meeting Don Wooley, who was the original Mr. Sachem, who kind of introduced me to what Sachem was like in the 50s and 60s. It was a vacation hub, and just living through that transformation from a small Lake Ronkonkoma town to the largest high school in America in 1986. It was more than interesting.
And we're definitely going to get into the growing pains and the just impact that Sachem had. But let's talk about you and your upbringing, and where did you come from? Where did you grow up? Who in your development made you into the coach that you were? Did you see yourself becoming, somebody who would impact the lives of thousands of people? Did you play soccer as a kid? Let's dive into your past as a child all the way on up.
All right. How long is this program? A half hour?
We'll cover 75 years in 30 minutes.
I grew up in New Hyde Park, western part of Nassau County. Mom and dad were immigrants. I was like a kid of the 50s. People were having children left and right after World War II. There was a friend on both sides of my home, growing up with kids, playing everything that we could invent. My soccer really was Dad telling me he would not allow me to play football. I couldn't understand. I was going to be this tall, lanky, wide receiver at a high school that was not going to throw a football. It didn't make sense to him. And because of my immigrant background, I had my uncle Chris, used to take me to Randall's Island. Randall's Island in the 60s had brought teams from Europe to play. There was triple headers every Sunday at Randall's Island, a 12 o'clock game, a 2 o'clock game, and a 4 o'clock game. And half my ancestry is Greek, so we always went to see a very popular Greek club team called Ike, and we would always watch them play. So I got to watch soccer at a fairly high level. I got to experience my first riot at Randall's Island, which is not a comfortable thing at age 12. And then fortunately, with my father saying no to football, I went out for soccer. We didn't have junior high soccer back then. And I tried out for the high school team. I was on the JV soccer team, and then eventually played varsity. And I had a great coach. Dutch Hess was a great guy, very involved with his players, that extended beyond the season. He's a gentleman who I kept in contact with until he passed away a couple of years ago. Just a quality gentleman.
Dutch Hess is like the greatest soccer coaching name. It's like a perfect old school name.
Yeah, and yet he was not. He said to me years later. He says he went to Cortland. He says, "I got a D in soccer, Frank." He was a football player, basketball coach, but he was a coach in the truest sense of the word coach. So that was part of my involvement. I had my best man became a semi-professional soccer player. We played a lot together. And then I had the good fortune to go to Clemson. And Clemson at the time did not have varsity soccer. We had club soccer. And my freshman year, I got elected as president of the club. We worked as my freshman, sophomore year, we were a club team, petitioned every year to be a varsity team. And they gave us varsity status my junior year. And the coach at that time was a PhD candidate in chemistry, an Arab from Israel by the name of Coach Ibrahim, who went on years later to win 2 national titles with Clemson. But he was a superior coach. He took me away from American soccer and introduced me to this is the way the game is supposed to be played because of his Middle Eastern, European background. I mean, he would rent 16 millimeter films of European games and show them to us so we could see how the game was played because the game was not on TV. There was no soccer on TV to emulate or watch. So, and he was, I'm going to go on and on about him. He was a graduate student going for his PhD. And the only reason why the athletic department allowed to have us field us as a varsity program was he agreed to coach us the first year for free because they were complaining about this is going to cost the university money and we weren't going to bring any money in. Nobody's going to attend soccer games. And they gave him a $5,000 budget and he went ahead and spent $10,000. He went over budget. It's like, and I think that was a lesson for me. He said, don't let anything stop you. Don't let anything get in the way of what you want.
No, that's amazing. And you've loved Clemson ever since. You know, Clemson's always been a part of your DNA. Did you foresee that program becoming an eventual national champion when you were just a fledgling club program, just trying to have fun and make it something?
No, there was no thought of that. I mean, we played in the ACC, which was a very strong and still is a very strong soccer conference. Matter of fact, my senior year, Maryland won the national title, and they were a team that we couldn't stand up to them. We escaped with a 3-1 loss. We could have easily been killed by a greater score than that my senior year.
And so you graduate from Clemson, and then what's after that? What's the path to eventual teaching and getting to Sachem?
I was working for Eastman Kodak. I was doing sales. I was working in Manhattan. When I went to Clemson, I went as a civil engineering student. And then when I couldn't pass Calculus 3, my roommate said, it's either Vietnam, Frank, or change majors. So I changed my majors to economic and history. And then I started applying for a teaching position without a teaching license, by the way. And I applied to every school I could find. And I don't know if the people listening to this know what a telephone directory is before the internet.
Yeah, the people listening to this are, probably 40 and above. So.
Okay. And so I applied to Smithtown, Hop-Up, Northport, Huntington. There was no town of Sachem. And my best man's sister, who was working in the Middle Country School District, she said to apply to Sachem. I didn't know what the heck a Sachem was. She says, because they're hiring left and right. So I got hired at Sachem. They were impressed by my blue suit and my short cropped hair. And the mistake, they thought Clemson was still a military college, which it was 10 years before I arrived there. So they thought I would be a great disciplinarian with teenagers, which is really not my personality, I don't think. And economics was just introduced as a state curriculum. So they saw that I majored in economics, so they thought I could teach economics. And then Don Wooley needed a JV coach. Dr. Fred Kreutzer did not want to coach anymore. And that's it. I became Don's junior varsity coach.
So we could definitely talk about Don now, because he's somebody I wish I got to know more. I only probably spoke to him late in life, but every story is better than the next. War veteran, iconic, the first great coach that Sachem had, who brought prominence to a program that didn't exist. He helped build it. Just a great person. And I want to actually have you on to just have a show about Don Wooley. I told you I want to have you and Tony Patillo, his son-in-law, and some other people Tom Sabatel. So we'll talk very, very in depth about Don, but what was your perception of him even at that time? He had been coaching the varsity for over 10 years, even by 1969. So it's he had established himself and he knew what he was doing.
Yes, he clearly knew what he was doing. I mean, he had won, his teams had won 6 league titles in a span of 10 years. You're well aware of this, that the first county championship sport team we ever had was in soccer, and we didn't have another one until 15 years after that. Don's 1960 team won the county title. Don was, it's so hard to describe in a brief way. I just watched how former players came back to reach out to him, and I was touched by that. I could see, like, okay, he reached them, and they formed a relationship with him that they did not want to end when they graduated high school. That impacted me, seeing that, having him as a role model in that way, knowing his love for kids and how the kids loved him.
How about as a tactician, X's and O's, knowing the game? I mean, his players bought in. So he was a leader, he was an educator, and he was a mentor, but he also knew the game.
He knew the game, but I remember Don, again, the opportunity to get to really know him fairly well. He described himself as and which is true, is that he was a motivator. He was a motivator. He gave credit to Fred Kreutzer, the JV coach and junior high coaches, and he said his strength, and I think other players said the same thing. He knew the game, but he really knew how to reach a high school kid. He knew how to get them to put something bigger than themselves ahead of them as a goal to reach.
And you're starting out 1969. You're just trying to get the hang of the teaching thing. You're thrown into the soccer world, which you obviously knew playing in Clemson. What's it like those first few years, and then eventually taking over varsity? The transition there. Talk about finding yourself as a young coach. That I'm sure a lot of those things you learned early on, you kept with you for decades later.
Again, how do I answer that question? The learning curve was continuous. I think when you first arrive as a coach, and if you have success right away, you tend to think, that's it, I have the answer. The truth was, the Sachem program, as dominant as we were in the 60s, by the early 70s, it started to go downhill. Don was tiring. He felt, I remember another great quote from him, says he felt coaching took 5 years away from his life. He was that emotionally tied into the game. What happened was we were in League Two at the time, and Western Suffolk and Nassau County, they already started club youth teams, soccer teams. And Sachem, our kids were still only playing soccer for the first time as 12, 13-year-olds in junior high. So all of a sudden our competition was not Senem Riches and Mattatuck anymore. It was the Western Suffolk schools like Northport, North Babylon, Huntington, who had youth league programs. So the kids were playing soccer at that time, probably starting around age 8, 9, and 10. Obviously, like a lot of sports, it's a skill sport. Starting earlier, we found competition was getting tougher and tougher. There was a year there, 2 years before I got the job, Sachem varsity, we didn't win one game. We didn't win one game. And I think Don knew he was tiring, and he didn't have an assistant coach, and he asked the athletic department to make me his assistant coach. So I got to be his assistant coach for 1 year. I think we escaped with like a 500, maybe one game of 500, and then I got the varsity job for the fall of '74. And we made the playoffs for the first time like in 3-4 years. So I thought, I've arrived. Okay, look what Frank Schmidt did. And then we followed that by not making the playoffs for the next 4 years.
Yeah, not easy. No, it doesn't matter what period in time, the bigger leagues in Suffolk, it could be 70s, 80s, or right now, it's just not easy to be a premier team in no matter what sport. You get the bigger enrollments, you have to really build a program, which is what you did. You built a program. You built a continuation of believing in each other, in the name in front of the jersey, in what Don Wooley built. I know you've always believed in where you come from is how you get ahead. And so talk about building your program. What were the ingredients? How did you go from those woeful years of like, this doesn't look great, to winning state titles? That wasn't some overnight thing. It took you a while to get to that point.
Oh, clearly. The difference, Chris, was we had to start a youth program. We had to start a youth league where kids were touching a soccer ball before seventh grade, and were playing more than just 2 months out of the year. So there was a Long Island Junior Soccer League. Like I mentioned, a lot of Western Suffolk's districts had club teams. So I started a club team. I didn't know what I was doing. I wanted to get this thing going. So I falsified a lot of applications. The Long Island Junior Soccer League said, well, you have to present papers with a president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, board of directors. I filled out this application. I just made up names. I was all for. I got some of the junior high coaches to help me find, and elementary school teachers, phys ed teachers, help me find some kids so I can start a travel team for young kids. And that's what so I coached one of the young teams. I got Steve Lorenz, I think was Steve coached my JV club team, again, youth leagues. And we did that for a couple of years. And then Pete Montalbano and I, the greatest assistant coach ever created, we started a camp, actually a clinic. We did that through Skip Fielding's office. And we started bringing kids in the summer to run a soccer camp. So that we can get 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds to see, don't wait till junior high to play soccer. Here's a chance for you to play. So we ran like 2-week, 3-week camps to get things interested. And then some of the parents bought into that. And they said, why don't we have a club team? And that's what eventually happened. The parents stepped up, created a youth league. I did a lot of clinics for them, made some suggestions, but they're the ones who got the program, youth league program going. But I take great pride in the fact that I found the Waverly Fields through a friend. They said Sachem owns the Waverly Fields, which was Kybel Farms. He told me that the district had purchased it or had been donated to them. So I went down there, laid out a field. I think everybody knows the 3-4-5 triangle, and squaring all the corners. Got the maintenance crew to take goalposts from behind the bus garage and put them down the Waverly Fields. Brought a lawnmower and a liner, and laid out the first youth soccer field there so that we could have youth league soccer.
And Sachem Youth Soccer League has been powerful ever since. Those fields are as vibrant as they've ever been. any weekend you go there, there's hundreds of kids and thousands of spectators, and it has changed the culture of youth sports, period, in this community, because there was no youth football league. There was barely little league. There was no youth basketball. I mean, SIAG was coming up, in its own at the same time, but the Sachem Youth Soccer League really changed the way we look at building programs. And so you were able to use those kids eventually as they made their way through these different ranks. And how did you form those bonds and relationships enough for them to be powerful junior high and then varsity players? I mean, that's a lot of work over many, many years. Did you have this vision of, if we do X, it will mean Y and we will win, which is Z? Like, was this a formula that you eventually saw as your future?
Yes. I mean, there was no question. Success was going to come as our athletes became more skilled, okay, or equal in skill to the competition. Again, because a lot of youth league clubs had already been formed years earlier, and we were in the catch-up mode. And then once we caught up, I mean, we really caught up. I take great pride in the fact that I kept a strong relationship with the youth league, whereas some coaches, some high school varsity coaches, and this worked both ways. There was a resentment of club teams. It was almost like, you're using my players. No, you're using my players. It was kind of sad. It was like there was butting of heads. There was like, I'll use the word animosity, jealousy. And fortunately, Sachem, I had a good relationship with Jesse Stancarone. These are people at the very beginning. Bill Galindo, Bill Doyle, Claude Amobieta, Luz Ventura, and the great Al Macucci, who wanted a relationship with the school program, which made it a lot easier for me.
Yeah. So let's fast forward to some of those big teams. And I always, and you heard me talk with Fred and Risa, I don't like to even mention specific players because there's so many good ones, and I never want to leave names out, just as coaches don't like to leave names out. But those teams, those state championship teams, those runs, those memories, the emotions that you felt, and I've talked to you about them before on one of the anniversaries of them. Talk about just, looking back at this point, what was it like? What do you remember most all these years later from both of them? And, would you say those are the defining moments or experiences of your career?
It's a great feather. And I don't want to say in my hat, it's a great feather in the hat of Sachem. If you're going to use the word moments, I had a million great moments with 1,000+ kids over that 30+ year of coaching. The back-to-back state championship team, that was an incredible accomplishment at the time. But I've said many times, please note, I was on the outside of the line, and there were 11 to 25, depending on the size of the roster. There were 11 young players inside the line that had to make the pass, that had to finish the shot, that had to clear the ball, that had to make the save. The state championships were won by quality kids, quality athletes, quality upbringing by parents. Defining moment, it was just a great feather in the program's hat to have teams like that. Just lucky to be at the right place at the right time as well.
When it comes to soccer that was played during those couple of years, is there a goal, a save, something that was the turning point in those games that you'll always remember as, okay, that's the reason? I mean, of course, there's many reasons and many players, but what was the defining soccer moment that helped make those happen?
Wow, defining moment. I think one of the if there is one of the defining moments was this team the 1993 team that made it to the state Final Four. Pete Montalbano and Benja. You have to you have to be there first. We lost. We lost to the eventual state champion. We lost 2-1 in a cold, bitter day up in Buffalo. We had to play at the University of Buffalo athletic fields. And it was a 9-hour, 10-hour bus drive home. And we were kind of slumped in our seats, Peter and I. But those boys took us there, just like previous teams that took us to the counties. And from there, I think that had to happen first. I think we had to lose there. I think we had to first get there, see what it was like. And then when the boys arrived in 97, 98, and 2000, it was, I think we knew more of what we needed to do, how to prepare our players, how to put them at ease, how to make them confident. I'm not saying we did all the right things, but I think we had confidence in ourselves. We knew this whole new environment of the state tournament, what it would entail.
So you wind up with 345 wins, tons of league titles, the 2 state titles, obviously. You retired in 2005, the 5th most wins in the county's history, and they had been playing soccer in Suffolk long before you started coaching. So to be one of those top 5 guys at that point, and still you're in the very high echelon of wins, just a very special career. That could you have foreseen all of that success? Probably not. Did you hope for it? I know you would say you hoped for successful outcomes for the kids and the community and the program, but how do you like to be remembered as a coach and educator? How do you like to have your athletes think about their experiences with you, which is way more important than 345 wins? How would you define those relationships and what you built with those kids?
Simply, he cared. If my players said, if they knew, I like to think they did, he cared about us as people. He cared about us, but something more than just soccer players. Then I know I was a success. And I think, again, I go back to Peter Montalbano, greatest assistant coach ever, Michael Flaherty, the greatest JV coach ever, all the junior high coaches that we had. It was, I think the program, keep using that word program, I think it was clear to the kids, and this is very important to 16, 17-year-olds who were breaking away from family, trying to form their own identity. I think it's important at that point in their life that someone cares for you beyond your own family, cares about you as a person. And it was important to us that these kids not just have success on soccer field, but that they get their life started and go in the right direction. I mean, Chris, you have such a great appreciation for history. When in the late 60s, early 70s, 65% of Sachem graduates went on to college. Okay. When I left, the figure's probably closer to 90%. Okay. And all the coaches, football, basketball, wrestling, male and female, it was very important to us as coaches that the kids at least have an opportunity to go beyond high school and go to college. I'm not saying college is for everyone, but have the opportunity to experience it. Don't have any regrets. And I think that's one of the things that I would like people to understand. Kids need someone outside the family to guide them, to lead them, to show them that we care. And I think that's the essence of our success. That these kids, how many of them went on to come back and teach and coach at Sachem, or teach and coach somewhere else, or held on to that memory, held on to that experience that they had on the athletic field and want to give it to their own children, want to give it to others. That's our mark of success at Sachem, and not just in soccer.
Yeah, and I'll bring it full circle from talking about the early days of Sachem in the late 60s, early 70s. What was it like to help build the defining culture that we had for all those decades? Bring it full circle of talk about a Sachem kid, talk about what Sachem was like in the 70s and 80s when it was being built. And I know it was built in the 50s and 60s, but really when you think about the coaches that came on board, of course, the Tom Sabatells, the Fred Vassaros, the Risa Zanders, the Jack Mahoney's, Bill Batewell, all these people built such a defining community. And my thesis for everything that I do here, everything that I try to build also to have people remember, the sports program had a lot to do with the vision of Sachem on the outside. Because we were winning, because we were so big, sports helped carry the anchor. But then academics, curriculum, and all the other opportunities followed. Then the size of the place was just monstrous, obviously, and you helped as a piece of that puzzle. And so, how do you wrap this up while talking about the evolution of Sachem, and how do we not forget who we once were, and how do we build on that?
You hire a Chris Vaccaro, who goes from Sachem Patch to a whole nother level. And what you're doing, Chris, is like, I think the idea is to build a stronger community, right? To improve on that community. And I don't think you can do that unless you can appreciate and enjoy what happened before. The success was, we just happened to be around the right people at the right time. Just that list of names you just gave, Mahoney, Friedheim, Batewell, Zander. We were in competition with each other. You know, it was okay. If Fred's going to work 120 miles an hour, Fred Vassaro, then I have to work 120 miles an hour. And Jack Mahoney, and there was that. You saw what other programs were doing to elevate their program, and you had to march in step unless you didn't care, unless you were doing it for a paycheck, which no one did back then. Not for the size of that paycheck back then.
Yeah,
you did because you had a passion for kids and a passion for the game, and you want to share that with young people.
And I hope and pray that current educators, and I talk about Sachem because that's who I am and that's where I live and that's why I do all what I do, but I hope that all educators and all coaches in all communities can think about building a program for the sake of the kids and the community. Coaches may not live or may not have attended schools in that community, but they have a major responsibility to make sure they uphold everything that's on the front of that jersey. And in some cases, some communities have no history and they can build it. And far too many people don't think like that. And that irks me. And so my message is constantly think about the bigger picture and think about believing in something bigger than yourself. And maybe you can do pretty good for the sake of the kids who are coming up behind you.
Yeah, Chris, going along with that, you know what? I think a lot of coaches would tell you, a lot of Sachem coaches tell you, and I know it's true in my case, and I know I'm not the only one. I live in the Three Village School District, okay, and I've lived here since 1971. I live in the Three Village School District, but my home was Sachem during those 36 years, and I think a lot of coaches were like that. It was that was their home, okay, away from home, and I think that's something I think the community needs to hear. Okay, Fred Vassaro going down to review films every Sunday morning at 7 o'clock in the morning till 12 noon. Okay, Jack Mahoney bringing in Olympic medal winning wrestlers every summer to work his wrestling camp. That's just a small sample of why Sachem was a unique place. Okay, and something that a lot of us are very proud to be a part of.
And I said I wouldn't mention specific players, but I do want to talk about Joe Scally because this is such an interesting story. You know, he's one of the top American soccer players in the world. Very interesting to go and sign so young with MLS and NYCFC, and then get transferred to the Bundesliga where he's playing in the top German league against arguably some of the top players also in the world.
Starting every game.
Yeah, starting every game. He will be on the U.S. men's national team at some point. He may be in World Cups. He may be playing this game for the next 20 years at a very high level. He's a Lake Grove kid. He's a Sachem kid. He was in the Sachem Youth Soccer League. He could not play Sachem varsity because he was doing all these other professional things, but he made sure he has a degree from Sachem. He made sure he had his academics set up in a way such that he could still be a Sachem alum. Amazing. He never forgot where he came from. He's still young. He's obviously early 20s, barely.
He's 19. He's 19.
Barely, not even there yet. You got to coach him a little bit when he was much younger. Did you see all this ahead for him? And talk about your impact with him and where he's possibly headed.
Again, I'm never good at predicting the future. He was, I did have him on my club team when he was like 11 and 12 years old. He was different. He was different in so many positive ways. Personality, as good a kid as you'd ever want to be around. You would want all your children to be friends with Joe Skelly. As an athlete, as a player, his brain worked differently. He just saw things. He was beyond mature in terms of his sense of what was going on the field, what was needed at that particular moment. And physically gifted, but the brain, the athletic brain, his vision was beyond anything I had ever seen. And he made me smile. He made me smile every day at practice, not just by his skill, but by his personality, how he interacted with other players. He had a great sense of humor. His parents did a good job of keeping him grounded, solid. He's a special one to watch and follow. But I've said this before. If you ever want to root for an athlete, a superior athlete, just based on personality, he's got to be at the top of the list.
Yeah. And that and being from Lake Grove and Sachem, it all makes for a great story from here. And I liked getting your perspective on that, and the fact that you were able to coach him. Pretty cool. More importantly, thank you for your impact and education and mentorship and guidance for thousands of students across many years here. I really enjoyed the conversation, but I really enjoy the lasting impact that you've left here. And just thank you for everything you've done for Sachem.
Thank you, Chris. And I look forward to our Don Wooley story time.
Yes, that's going to be good. That's going to be exciting. We'll do that hopefully in the next couple months. And these interviews will be archived and logged and as part of a Sachem oral history project, and they will be saved at the Sachem Public Library and each of the high schools' libraries for posterity and for the sake of keeping this history around for many generations. So thanks again for everything, and we'll wrap it up.